Hello, and welcome to CubsPS Plus, a Northside numbers game, a weekly podcast that dives headfirst into the analysis of hot topics driving Chicago Cubs baseball. I'm your host, Mike Waller, a lifelong Cub fan, full-time baseball stat nerd, and sometime youth baseball coach. Thank you for being here today. I know you have a lot of choices. You can also find me on Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, and YouTube, all at CubsPS Plus, a spin on the baseball metric OPS Plus. If you can, please take 10 seconds and drop a rating or a review on Apple, Spotify, Pandora, Stitcher, or wherever it is you get your podcasts. If you've done that, thank you so much. Maybe you could share an episode with a friend. Just a few seconds on your end can help me get better and help other Cub fans find the show. You can also now help support the CubsPS Plus podcast by going to cubspsplus.patreon.com. There are 4 support tiers that come with added perks such as access to a private Discord discussion group, access to bonus episodes, merchandise discounts in the merch store that will launch in the coming weeks, and the ability to submit priority questions ahead of time for interview guests and more. Your support will help me keep this podcast ad-free. Welcome into episode 35. The Cubs aren't playing as well as they were the last time I sat down to have a conversation with you all. So let's let this week's episode be a nice distraction from all the concerns about what's going on with the team on this road trip, 1-5 so far, heading into the final game against the Nationals. We can get back to all those things in the next episode. This week I was able to sit down and talk baseball with Cubs baseball scientist Dr. Mike Sonne, who the Cubs hired for his biomechanics experience last October. We talk about the role of baseball science within the Cubs system and how things have gone for him in his first 6 months. Are you ready? I'm ready. Here we go. Today I'm thrilled to be joined by Dr. Mike Sonne, baseball scientist with the Chicago Cubs. Welcome, Mike.
Thank you very much for having me on, Mike.
This is great. I've been looking forward to it, to getting you on here. How was it? I know you got a background in biomechanics. How did you wind up in baseball?
So I would actually say I've been a huge baseball fan my entire life. I originally thought I was going to get into athletic training, but that was a little bit more on the football side of things. Career kind of veered coming out of my undergrad, and I went more into the ergonomics world. My PhD, I looked at studying muscle fatigue, and built a model for predicting muscle fatigue. You know, all the while, baseball was coming up with this idea of the pitch clock, and the two research fields kind of crashed into each other. Did a paper on how I thought the pitch clock might impact muscle fatigue in pitchers, and the rest was history.
That's great. So what are you finding? How is the theory that you've been working with proving out in the majors? I know it's been in the minor leagues, but it does seem to operate a little bit different at the big league level. Yeah,
I know, subjectively, some of the players are commenting on feeling like they're rushed or that pitch clock is different than it's been in the minor leagues. I know across the board, people are, they're happy with the product on the field. The league is, without a doubt. I know a lot of our coaches are happy with the product on the field because they're, getting home 20, 30 minutes earlier than they have in the past. I think we need to keep an eye on injury rates and velocities as the season goes down. We move along. I know that's something that we're monitoring. So it's going to be something that we need to pay attention to as this season goes along.
So as the baseball scientist, what are you looking at with that? What are you digging into?
I mean, I'm looking at characteristics around how the pitchers move, how their mechanics change, looking into velocities, but also listening to the coaches. There's a good subjective and qualitative aspect to this as well to get their ideas on how things are working. Okay.
And do you mostly, in your role, interact with the coaches?
Yes, definitely. I think our entire baseball sciences department is very focused on how do we make sure that we educate and empower our coaches to use data in the most effective way, to deliver that information to the player in their unique way that they found to be successful with the players. Okay. And kind of distill that information down so that it can be used, whether it's in a bullpen or in a game or in the batter's box.
Okay. And you're how often are you on site? I know you're based in Canada, right?
Yeah, just based about 45 minutes outside of Toronto. So I'm in Chicago for at least one home series every month, and then I visit every single one of our affiliates twice in season. So I I was in Chicago and South Bend 2 weeks ago, and then I was in Phoenix last week, and I'm back in Chicago next week. So this is my 1 day back home for in a bit, but then we have a bit of a break.
So I guess walk me through what a typical day is for you. Like, what does the baseball scientist with the Cubs do?
Yeah, I mean, it's a very exciting job. Like I'm thrilled with it because it's hard to say what a day-to-day is. It's unique because today we're meeting with our entire R&D staff to kind of break things down of what happened in the past few series, and getting everybody's ideas on how that went and what we could do better as a group. And all that while I'm doing some data analysis and running queries on certain variables that I'm interested in. But when I head out to the affiliates or whatever, it's a lot of being on the field. When I'm at the affiliates, I actually get to put on baseball pants and be in the dugout and do exciting things like that. I really enjoy that aspect of things because I tend to get my research ideas from being as close to the action as possible. Going back to the ergonomics world, that was trying to put pins in cars on the assembly line, or getting right into a nuclear reactor, and doing assessments in there. So being close to the action and actually feeling those pain points and feeling what questions our guys are struggling to answer, that's super, super helpful. So it's a very, very diverse role. The demands change based on what the team needs. We're typically working on things that are to set us up for, later this season, next season. Not a lot of putting out immediate fires. But you get to kind of touch every aspect of working with the team, which is super exciting.
That's very cool. So let's back up a little bit. So when you came from the automotive world, that's where you did your doctoral thesis, correct?
Mm-hmm.
And then you came through with ProPlay AI, you co-founded. Walk me through the single camera, the markerless motion capture. Sorry.
Yeah, and that actually came out of that ergonomics world as well. And back in 2020, even 2019, late 2019, we had been exploring how to use markerless motion capture technology in the ergonomic space. So film somebody working, get an idea of how much risk they might have for injury, and look at that. And all the while, I was maybe helping out a couple amateur teams or playing in men's league, and use that technology just to see how somebody was pitching and said, we might have something here. So we kind of put together a proof of concept of that product, took it to the MLB winter meetings in 2019 in San Diego, went really, really well. Started building out that product a little bit more. I mean, I had a meeting with Craig Breslow and Ryan Otero on, I think it was March 9th, 2020, at Sloan Park. And we know what happened after that.
Yeah, right after that.
So, it's been an interesting journey, but what we did with 3Motion AI or ProPlay AI, as the product's called, we were just trying to reduce some of the technical barriers when it came to capturing data on how people move. We have fantastic systems internally that allow us to do that. And that's both with the Cubs and the rest of baseball. Mm-hmm. They do tend to be, a little bit more expensive, require a bit more technical knowledge, but huge decisions are being made off of those data. Mm-hmm. So ProPlay AI, the goal of that was to just come up with a system that reduced some of those technical barriers. And, while it wasn't as accurate, it was a lot faster to get. It was still very reliable. And you could capture that, if you're trying to work on somebody to change something in their mechanics during a drill, you could actually see if that was changing. So that was a very exciting project to be on, and, still keep in touch with those folks.
Can you run old video through that? So you got somebody like, let's say, Cody Bellinger. So he had those great years in LA. Mm-hmm. Now you're breaking down his mechanics. Can you run some of his old footage through when that technology was not available in the past?
Yeah, absolutely. If it meets the certain criteria for that, typically need like a higher frame rate video just to make sure that we
Okay.
can get things at like 120 frames, which most cell phones can do, and a lot of
Hmm.
broadcasts do. So yeah, that's definitely been one of the use cases. I know a lot of people, and myself included, back when I was with the company, we would like to compare people against certain pros, or more importantly, I would say compare them back to themselves when they were at their
Hmm.
peak. So, that Bellinger example is a very good one.
Cool. And that allows you, whereas like in the pitch lab, I know they've got setups with hundreds of cameras and all the precision and all that stuff. So this allows you to be out on the field in the bullpen, grab some cell phone camera.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean,
Okay.
I've you know, not for any sort of serious analysis, but we've got people throwing baseballs after jumping off a cliff that we've measured while they were doing that. We've got people throwing in very weird places in very weird attire, just because you can capture it anywhere. So
That's amazing.
you're working with somebody on a backfield. And you want to just get a quick capture, see how they're doing, and compare it against the other video you've got from a game. That's definitely one of the main use cases we've had.
Okay. Now, how involved in the R&D are you focused on trying to see where guys are trending and predict in the future, or do you get called in to work on, say, mechanical issues, kind of all of it?
I would say like it's all of it, but what I would say, like, it's kind of bigger picture.
Okay.
It's setting up the scaffolding to allow other analysts to do that, or setting up a framework to help the coaches look at data in a certain way. Um, There'll be the occasional time where we'll get a message or get a call and say, hey, can you give us your thoughts on this one specific player? But for the most part, I think the framework we put together and the work that we do, it helps our coaches address those certain player issues, because we're getting better at it. The industry's getting better at it. But at the end of the day, we don't necessarily know why somebody has changed how they move. Maybe it's an injury. Maybe it's a certain cue they were given. And our coaches are really, really good at, being a coach, but also being a part-time psychologist and,
Mm-hmm.
part-time person that diagnoses what might be happening with her.
Yeah, during the offseason, I interviewed Mark Weissman, the strength and conditioning coach for Myrtle Beach, and he was telling me about all the sensors they wear, and they track, how much they move around the complex and all that. I assume you have access to all that data to use as you see fit.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and we use that to look at the differences between different positions, and you might have two people playing the same position, but one of them's moving way more. Why is that? Is it inefficiency, or is it just that they're a better athlete? They're running more because they feel they can get to certain things. But we do work very closely with Weiss and the other S&C staff. Whether they're asking us to help them solve a problem, or we're saying, hey, this data would be extremely helpful for us to relate back to the on-field performance.
Okay.
It's a very connected group with everyone.
That's good. One question I have on your focus, a lot of what I've read about your background is focused on pitching, and there's a lot of obvious pitching mechanics. Do you work as much on the hitting side, or do you focus a lot on the pitching?
I would say, like, with my work particularly, the stuff I'm doing with pitching, I feel like if you read about any of the things I'd done in the past, like, you're going to have a pretty good idea of what I'm doing. The hitting world is like definitely more of like the skunk works side of things, I think. And it's been really fun. Like, some of the technologies we have access to, it's been a really fun, really adventurous, taking, pun intended, but taking absolutely huge swings to see if we can, hit real home runs with that work in there, and bear some real fruit. So I would say, it's maybe 60-40 pitching to hitting right now, but some of that work we're doing on the hitting side is very, very exciting.
Now, on the hitting side, is there a particular part of the motion you're looking at? Are you looking at how the force gets going? Are you looking at where the hands and the bat go, bat plane?
I think like very comparable to pitching, right? Like, you want to understand ball velocity or exit velocity or bat speed, that's great. But you do have to work back the chain, right? And on the hitting side, I think it's like, how do we make sure that we can work back that chain and go all the way back and say, what's causing somebody to have better contact, what's having better power, and that can be very different person to person.
And that's something I've seen the Cubs really improve on the last couple of years. I mean, I think 2 years ago, the strikeout rates across the lineup, and some of it is the profile players the Cubs have brought in, but the contact is so much better now than it was before. So
I mean, you look at I think that's a lot by design by player, but also our hitting group, there's some pretty smart people in that group. Like Justin Stone is brilliant. And then Rachel and Polly, those two as our hitting coordinators right now, those people, if you get them to sit down at a bar and ask them a question about hitting, you better be prepared to shut that place down. They live it, they breathe it, they absolutely love it, and they're very motivating to be around because they just have such high expectations of themselves and everybody around them, and it's an absolute pleasure to work with that group.
That's so cool. And I mean, the way the pitching goes, all the spin, all the ball movement, I love seeing the pitching ninja, all the overlays people can get now. And honestly, I don't know how anybody hits. I was a bad hitter in high school, and that was mostly just 80 miles an hour fastballs.
Well, yeah, I mean, some of the fun that we get to have in R&D is we get to go in against some of our technologies, and we get to go and see what it's like to face 95. And my initial reaction to that has always been, this game's impossible. I don't understand how anybody can do this. You're like, wow, that must have been 95. You're like, no, that was 70. I'm like, this is impossible. Now pair that with a slider and you don't know what's coming next. I don't understand how anybody gets a hit.
Well, and sometimes you look so ridiculous, right? Because you swung at a pitch that bounced at 55 feet. But the point is, you saw it like a split second out of the pitcher's hand. You saw fastball, and it wasn't a fastball.
Yeah, exactly. So, yeah, the pitching ninja and Rob and, a lot of those groups online, they do a pretty good job of demystifying why this is so hard. But, I think that's part of the game with how filthy guys are now. You got to be comfortable maybe not looking great.
Right. Well, one of the guys I wanted to ask you about, so Caleb Killian came up and made this start on Saturday. And he was up last year. He had a pretty good first start. Then I think there were some mechanical issues. And then you could just see him on Saturday. I don't know if it was nerves and pressing, but he didn't have his breaking ball in the first inning. It was a long 40 pitch inning. Really struggled, but he bounced back and looked a lot better in the second and the third inning and into the fourth. After a start like that, I mean, do you go in and look and work with the pitching staff to try to figure out why his breaking ball wasn't moving in the first inning?
Yeah. Yes and no. I would say that me personally, I would not be involved with something that close.
Okay.
But we would look at overall trends and see certain things that Caleb has done. I know back in spring training, our pitching group is working really, really closely with Caleb. And I think the general impression of things would be really tough first inning. Happens to everybody. Some of the greatest pitchers in the world have had those types of first innings. I think we're all very proud of, what transpired after that and view that as something that is really foundational to build on.
Yeah. I know I was never a pitcher, but my son pitched all through high school, and it's just one day he can be throwing the changeup and everything is perfect, and next day he's on the mound and it's just gone. Yeah,
it just disappears. And then maybe, I think where our coaches are really exceptional is they know player to player, here's this one thing that I can say to you that's going to snap it right back in, right? And I think that's what makes the best pitchers in the world is that they can course correct really quickly when it isn't going as well as they think. So whether that's our coaches or that's our players themselves or that's our coaches teaching our players how to do that, I think that's something that the organization does really well.
When you're working with, we'll stick on the pitching, you're working with a pitcher, and I know guys have added, the sweeper slider, they're adding a new pitch. Do you work with? I guess you probably primarily work with the coaching staff.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
So if you see a trend, if you see a guy, we think with his arm path, this particular pitch would work really well. Do you you provide the analysis, and then do you start to show what a solution might look like? Or if a guy's having mechanical problems and kind of missing, say, up in a lot, do you try to model back and try to find that root cause?
I mean, I would say, like, kind of even going back to, the earlier point, like, I believe like our role is more to provide the framework to help understand when something goes off the rails, like maybe ahead of time. Okay. Or identify the characteristics that would contribute to somebody being able to use a certain pitch. And then to really communicate that to our coaches who are working day to day with that athlete and with those pitchers. And then our pitchers would be the ones that, or our coaches would be the ones to instill something like that of, hey, let's get this type of thing going. And, our R&D group does a really good job of providing that type of insight and that type of a flagging to say, let's try this out with this player. And, that's probably one of the most exciting things about the Cubs organization is how much collaboration there is, right from the coaches all the way to the R&D, all the way to strength and conditioning, and everybody kind of works together on the same type of problems.
What do you guys do from an injury prevention standpoint?
Yeah, I mean, preventing injuries in pitching specifically, yeah, it's extremely difficult, right? That's we solved that issue, and it's like you've got kind of the holy grail there, right?
Yes.
I think foundationally, you talk to Mark in the strength and conditioning group, it's trying to build like a very strong foundation that can hold up over the course of 162 plus, right? It's monitoring things with those sensors like Mark was talking about, monitoring people's workloads, making sure that they don't spike too quickly during a season or spike too quickly before the season, and looking at progress. I think everybody can say they've unturned every rock and they've done everything they could to look at this. And I think every day we try and solve a little bit more of that problem, but it's challenging. And it's the reason why we, bring in a lot of smart people from a lot of different realms to try and solve that problem. And, I know Jeff Passan had an article maybe last week, maybe 2 weeks ago that just said injuries are up again this year. Right. Like, yep. And, some of that is maybe guys that are, flying pretty close to the sun. They're throwing really, really hard, but that's what gets guys out, and that can be what gets guys paid. Yep, so it's sure. A delicate balance there, for sure. Of, a lot of guys are of the mindset that it's better to be as good as you can be, and you kind of find where the cards lie after that, rather than to never even get a shot at getting to the majors.
I have to think that's kind of what makes, we were talking before about how hard it is to get in the majors and stay there. Back in the day, 50 years ago, starting pitchers were expected to go 8-9 innings, basically complete everything they started. So yep. You can't go max effort for 9 innings.
No.
You're going to burn out. And
I do think that's, that might be one of the unintended consequences of the pitch clock, is that guys do have to scale it back a little bit if that's the case, or it's a matter of changing some of their training, and trying to get it so that they can withstand that workload a little bit more. So lots of things there, and it's an ongoing process to try and better understand it.
One of the things I saw in your background that was interesting to me is some of this work you've done looking at the impact of relievers and how often they get up to warm up. Yep. Do you guys kind of set up a framework for how much work is too much, or how much does a bullpen session add to the workload that reliever's carrying?
Yeah, I mean, it's not a cop out or anything like that, but it's amazing the difference between guys. You have some guys that they need the lights to be on, and then there's other guys that need the lights to be on, and they need a third deck in the stadium to really like get into their velocity and really throwing hard. So it is pitcher to pitcher specific. The bullpens are very important because they help with execution. They help us train command. They help us train velocity. They help us develop new pitches. And if you want any task to translate between practice and game, you want to try and make that task as close to game-like as possible, whether you're out on the driving range and playing golf, or you're taking BP, or you're throwing a bullpen. The relievers, when they're getting ready in that bullpen, I'm not going to say the term, but the dry issue that they have when they're being called up, and they don't get into the game. I know we count that towards their workload. And I know that our bullpen coaches, our managers, they get all the kind of limits ahead of time, so they know who's available on a certain day, whether that's green, yellow, red, or black, and they can make the right decision on which pitcher they need to bring in.
And so who kind of sets those on a daily basis, and how do you guys come up with those ratings?
Yeah, I mean, it's partially looking at how much pitching have they done recently versus how much pitching have they done over the last 30 days. That's a big one. Understanding how they're feeling, whether they're saying hey, I'm feeling like I'm a little bit sore today, or not feeling like I'm super strong today. It's the feedback from the athletic trainers. It's the feedback from the strength and conditioning guys. All of that kind of goes into one spot and gives us it's not necessarily super black and white. It's kind of a gradient of if you absolutely need this guy, this is a guy you can use today, versus there's no reservations on how much this player could be used today.
Okay. I assume the importance of the game or the time of the season you're in plays into it too. Obviously, Game 7 of the World Series, probably everybody's available. You got the whole off season to get right.
I think that's definitely true, right? I think that's true in the sense of you are expected in the playoffs to be ready to rock and give us your best. That being said, you may have times where we know that this guy on his second day, his velocity is going to be down 3 miles an hour and he's going to get left break on his slider. It may not be the best time to bring that person into a game. So that makes a big difference as well, right? I think if you talk to most professional pitchers, most professional athletes, they want to play every day. They would, if you gave them the opportunity to go out and compete or sit on the bench, they'd choose competition pretty much every single day. But it's up to us to help guide our staff and our athletes to say, today's the day that you're going to get the absolute most out of what you do.
Okay. What do you see? Do you see much difference in the data and some of the actual biomechanical markers when weather is really cold? Chicago in April as opposed to going down to Miami this weekend and playing in the humidity down there.
I'm not sure if it shows up too much in terms of changes. I know it shows up in velocity, and I know that it shows up in probably the rating of perceived exertion there. I know there's a lot of guys that are not huge fans of Chicago in April, but luckily it's not our guys. It's the other teams that really seem to
right.
to hate that. And I mean, this April is not really the greatest example either. We had some.
Yeah, it's actually been pretty nice.
Yeah, we've had some great days there. So I think it's probably something to consider on the warm up side of things too, right? If it's really cold out there, you might need a little bit more to get warm, to get ready to go into that game. And I know that does definitely get factored in.
Okay. Sorry, I lost my train of thought here.
No worries.
Oh, so with a season like the Cubs are having right now, I mean, I think things on the whole are going pretty well. I've seen some of the numbers, the metrics would say the Cubs are actually playing a little bit unlucky. Maybe the Pythagorean record should be a little bit better. But I think this team came in, there were expectations that they could potentially compete in the division, compete for a wild card, and really start to make some movement this year as opposed to the last couple. When they're in the margins like this, they're playing a lot of close games, and it's a pitching and defense kind of built team. Mm-hmm. I imagine you guys are trying to scrape out every little edge you can find to try to flip those margins in the Cubs' favor.
Yeah, I think that's like, at the end of the day, I think a lot of us in R&D and baseball science are almost trying to evaluate what we do the same way that we evaluate what the players do. Like, is there anything we can do to add 0.1 WAR to the team? And put a guy in the best possible situation to make a good decision or execute something better. So, like I was mentioning, we talk regularly across the entire organization and try and find the best possible ways that we can all, contribute. And that involves making some pretty crazy guesses at what might work and trying out some really wild things. And it's really cool. I'd say one of the best parts of things is you have an idea sometimes. It goes up the chain and, you've got Carter, he's got your back and he's like, we're making this happen. And, he tries to get it out to everybody and say, listen, this is the idea we want to go with. And it's got the backing from the GM, and Carter and Jed are all over it. So, our ideas go all the way up to that level, and we all have each other's back. And it's really, at the end of the day, we're all working towards the same thing. We all want to relive 2016 and build the next great Cubs team.
Yeah. Can you give me an example of one of the crazy ideas? Maybe even something that didn't work, but just something that was kind of fun to dig into and explore.
I mean, I've been full-time with the Cubs since last November, and then had done some consulting work in the past. And I would say those crazy ideas are probably falling under that other topic we had talked about earlier as the things that I can't really touch on too much. Fair enough. I can say that, we try to put ourselves in a position internally where we recognize all of the best possible technologies that could help us. And we turn over every stone when it comes to trying out new technologies in the wearable space, in the training space, and everything like that. And we will, we might try out 10 technologies before we find the 11th that, hey, there's something here. And then when we find out that it's here, it's a full press throughout the organization, wherever we have access to that technology to use it in that case. So it's kind of that intersection of trying a new technology along with how we implement that technology. That's like the really advanced stuff. And that's definitely where we get everyone involved.
Okay. Did you guys get down to analyzing, the equipment players use, the size and weight of bat, making recommendations on, maybe later in the season they go to a slightly lighter bat, slightly shorter bat?
Yeah. And I mean, I think the characteristics of the bat matter a lot too, right? A bat is going to perform slightly differently in Arizona than if it's been sitting out in a closet there, and as opposed to, Chicago in August when it's super humid and there. So definitely like looking at the different ball characteristics and how those might change. I think those are definitely two of the areas that we fully explore to try and see if there's any advantage we can gain there.
And how do you guys mention the baseball? Baseball's gotten a lot of publicity over the last few years with the ball changing every year. Do you guys get specs from Major League Baseball, or do you just need to get the ball in and just see how it's playing and react on the fly?
It's definitely more that second one. And it's and it was definitely that was a surprise to me.
Yeah, it's crazy. I mean, I've played with some different baseballs, and there was a coach that works with my son had an actual World Series baseball, and I mean the laces are so small, so low profile compared to rec league balls or high school baseballs, youth league, stuff like that.
Well, and I know we've looked at ball characteristics from the Cape Cod League to Japan to AA to Major League. Like, there can be quite a bit of variance depending on the level you're at, the location you're at, and I know there's conspiracy theories out there depending on who's playing and on what night of the week. So.
Do you does that get factored in a lot? Say in the minor leagues, do you factor in how the ball is performing so you can get better context on what a guy's doing?
I mean, as much as we can, right? I know up until our low levels of the minors, up until I believe Double A uses a different ball than Double A through the major leagues.
Okay.
And that's the specific major league ball. So it feels a little bit different. It performs a little bit differently. So we try to understand that context as best as we can. In terms of like the variance day to day or the variance within a ball, I think we're just, trying to take reasonable aggregates of our information so that we do get a representative idea as to how that ball performs. But yeah, when things change, you definitely sometimes are wondering like, hey, what's happening here? I know. Yeah. I know as an analyst, I'm glad that I don't have to try and make sense of the pitching performances in Mexico City that happened this weekend. So
that was wild. that was pretty extreme altitude.
Yeah, because I believe Colorado is around 5,000 feet. And I think Mexico City is closer to 7,000 feet. So as much as there's the Coors effect, it's wild. There's this Mexico City effect. That ball was absolutely flying.
Yeah. Well, and no Coors Field, they've done a lot of things. They got the humidors set up and they do a lot of prep on the balls ahead of time to try to knock some of that down. But that was wild this weekend. I did not see that coming.
Yep, absolutely.
Poor pitchers had to throw that weekend.
I know. Yeah, you feel bad for them, that's for sure.
So how have you seen, since you've come on, you came on in the off season, I imagine there was a lot of, getting to know the staff and getting the models set up. How different is the in-season work for you versus the out of season? Are you kind of always digging into the same types of problems?
Like I was saying earlier, I do feel like our group, we're trying to work on stuff that might impact the team down the road. So in the season, our schedules do revolve around when the team is home or when our minor league teams are home or whatever's happening there. So we are cognizant of it. I would say though that like the majority of our work, our projects that we work on, those don't change too much. If we are seeing like a trend that's happening across the org that's happening in these games, we may go, hey, is this something that's actually happening, or is this just like a statistical anomaly? And we might react to something like that. But, normally our projects are kind of set, and then that's probably 80% of our time, with 20% of our time revolving around, okay, what's a fire that we need to help put out?
Okay. When you were working with guys we talked about a little bit earlier, the strikeout rates for hitters. Mm-hmm. And you got guys like Patrick Wisdom's done a great job bringing his strikeout rate down over the past few seasons, and we're seeing the results of that. And I know Christopher Morel is one who came up last year and got off to a quick start. By the end of the season, his strikeout rate was going up because pitchers had a book on him. Yep. How much do you set up in terms of feeding them, trying to get the batters to understand different pitch types, or is it more mechanical? Like, what goes into decreasing a guy's K rate?
I think it's helping them come up with the information they need to make really good decisions, and quantifying their swing decisions. I'd say on our end, it's quantifying certain things about their bat path that may influence them to have a higher swinging strike rate, or telling them what pitches they need to maybe lay off because they're just not going to be able to put a good swing on it. Like I was mentioning earlier, our hitting group with like Sonne and then Rachel Folden and Steven Polikoff, they do a pretty incredible job of understanding those individual differences. And, I think we're seeing, like with Morel, like he's tearing the cover off the ball right now in AAA, and it'll be exciting to get to see him, at Wrigley whenever that time comes. So I think when these guys have things like elevated K rates or noticeable flaws, we do approach it with like an all hands on deck approach to say, what are the things we're going to need? What are the tools we're going to need to help him improve?
Okay. And then kind of in the same vein, but almost the reverse. So you got a guy like Nico Horner, who's super high contact. And I know bit by bit, they're trying to grow a little bit more power in him. Not that maybe he'll never be a 30 homer guy, but gap doubles, use his speed, maybe get from the 10 home runs he hit last year to like 15. Do you guys build those out in models and kind of help the batter understand maybe when to swing a little harder, maybe go a little bit closer to max effort to try to get that extra pop?
I think that gets considered in there. I mean, I would say like an interesting thing with Nico, right, is like he hit a ball 111 earlier this season. Like,
yeah,
that's hitting the ball extremely, extremely hard.
Yes.
Right? Like anything over 110, that's getting into like absolutely crushing the ball. And a lot of our guys can hit the ball really, really hard. So that power is there. I think sometimes it comes down to approach and like when in the lineup is he being used? Like we're trying to get him on base more and, play that leadoff role and use his speed when he's on the bases. And, when the time comes, yeah, he can unload on one. And like we said, 111, he's grown a lot and he's really hitting the ball hard.
Yeah. Well, and there's been a lot of good contact. I mean, even the Marlins series, I was watching the game yesterday. There were probably 6 or 7 outs where the balls were just crushed, and it was either a fielder made a great play or it's right at a guy.
Yeah.
I guess with that, you're just trying to reinforce that, like, keep doing this, because if you're hitting the ball 95 mile an hour plus, you're going to have more good results than bad.
Yeah, exactly. It can be frustrating, and series like this Marlins one can be frustrating, but you do have to keep in mind that it's 162, and there's probably going to be a few games where we get some seeing eye singles and end up winning, right? Like, you win a 2-1 game, or those 1-run games they can make your hair go gray, but they can also, lead to making the playoffs at the end of the year. And a lot of times those things kind of shake out.
And when we're at this point in the season, along the same vein, when do you start feeling comfortable that maybe a change has stuck as opposed to a guy had a hot week? Like Cody Bellinger could be an example. He got off to a really slow start the first week or two, but it's really been tearing the cover off the ball lately. Like, when do you feel good that, okay, I think this change is in?
Yeah, I think that's something that we look at that occurs periodically. Like, you want to check in on like different windows, right? Because something might happen for 2 weeks at one point in time, and then it goes down again. And looking at things like their peak exit velocities and looking at their decisions they're making. Like, you can't let outcome always determine everything. You have to
right.
Go to your process and see if all the steps to make a good decision and make good contact and the swing was good, and if all of that is looking really, really good, you have to kind of encourage the player to say, listen, like, keep going. Like, it's in there. You're eventually going to get some to get some stuff to fall in place.
And do you guys get involved in decisions with, let's say, guys working on some problems and maybe there's something off with the mechanics? Do you guys get involved with, is it better to work it out at the big league level or potentially go back to AAA and be able to do it in a little bit more relaxed environment?
I wouldn't say that's something that we're super involved in. We usually find out about those transactions on Twitter with everybody else. Okay. So no, that's definitely not our domain.
Okay. Cool. But I really enjoyed having you on today. Any interesting bits or stories you want to share from something you can share? Yeah,
I mean, I think it's been a lot of fun. I think the staff that we have, I would say one of the most impressive things that I saw in spring training is, Tommy Hotovy said, I think this is happening with one of our pitchers' mechanics. And he's like, could you get me some data on that to see? And like, his eye test was like spot on. And
that's amazing.
When we are looking at a lot of these data, I think we have the data in place to help our lower level coaches be able to make decisions at the same level as, maybe our major league coaches. But I've been very, very surprised. Not because I didn't think it was happening, because part of the reason I joined the Cubs was because I really like the staff and I really like the people and I really like their processes. But to see it in action of like how data heavy our guys closest to the major league level, our major league pitching coach, how much he uses those data and how good the eye test is there. it really did kind of blow my mind.
That's impressive.
Yeah.
It's probably along the same vein as now that we have review for umpires. I mean, it's amazing how good the umpires actually are.
Yes,
in
exactly.
A lot of cases.
I think that's the general story. Is, we're talking about how hard hitting is. Being closer to things has only tripled or quadrupled my appreciation just for how good Major League Baseball players are and how fine that line is between being the best hitter in the game and toiling in the minors. It's pretty remarkable, just exactly how difficult the game is, but just how good these guys are.
I guess one last question before we get out. There's some more rule changes that Theo Epstein proposed that are going to go in for some testing this year. As soon as those ideas get proposed, do you guys start looking ahead to what would that mean, or do you wait till that rule's a little bit more baked? And
I think we would probably try and start exploring just what the impact is, running some theoretical models to say, is a bigger base going to lead to more steals, and just to make ourselves aware as to what might happen when these things are implemented. We probably don't exhaust every avenue of R&D into exploring rule changes until, it's like, hey, like this is actually happening. It's being rolled out at, the Southern League or whatever it is. And then we'll kind of keep our eyes peeled on, how those changes impact things there. But yeah, it's going to be interesting to see what other rule changes come along and just how those impact the pace of the game and the product on the field.
Yeah, for sure. Well, thank you for your time today. Enjoyed having you on.
I'm glad we could do this. It was a lot of fun.
Yeah, you have the job. I think me and most of my audience would love to have. Baseball scientist for the Chicago Cubs is maybe the best title ever.
Like I said before, I don't think it's a dream job because I don't think I'd ever be this audacious to dream something like this could happen. So it is a lot of fun, and I'm very, very grateful to have the opportunity.
Great. Where can people find you?
I'm on Twitter as at Dr. Mike Sonne, the same on Instagram, and at this point, it's more dog pictures and photos of my friends playing softball here in Hamilton. But feel free to reach out, and I can answer the questions I can answer.
Sounds great. Thank you for your time.
Yeah, thanks a lot.
Thank you for joining me today, and another big thank you to Mike Sonne for coming on the show. If you liked the discussion, or maybe especially if you didn't, please drop a rating and a review wherever it is you get your podcasts, or tell a friend about the show. Just a few seconds gives me great feedback and helps other Cubs fans find the show. You can also find me on Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, and YouTube, all at CubsPS Plus. And check out the new Patreon page, CubsPSPlus.patreon.com, to help support the show and keep it ad-free. This is Mike Waller, host of the Cubs PS Plus podcast. Every day with Cubs baseball or talking about Cubs baseball is a great day. Go Cubs!